Indian private bank. They asked the question, we've got customers misregistering. They've got 20 accounts under very similar names. They say, for instance, extremely similar names. Can we figure out what's in common? Well, it turns out we can, right? Because if the name or the account number does not stand alone, we have it broken up into the first name, the last name. We have often son of so-and-so. We have the address which has a PIN code. We have a passport number sometimes. We have a PAN card number sometimes. We have a license number sometimes. There are, thanks to know your customer norms in India and equivalent norms abroad, there are enough other data points. And then you can say, look, if somebody has the same date of birth and the same PIN code and the same PAN number, but the names are different, there's a pretty good chance that it's the same person. It's very unlikely that you have two people born on the same day with the same PAN card and the same address. Now you start clustering these, and then you say, okay, wait, here's a cluster of half a dozen accounts which have five things in common. Here's a cluster that has 10 things in common. Here's a cluster that has 20 things in common. And then you say, let's investigate these to see if they are in fact the same account. We had one gentleman who had registered 21 different accounts. One was his name, son of so-and-so. Another was his wife's name, wife of so-and-so. The other was his first name and last name reversed. The other was his first name, his village name, his last name. You can sort of look at it and say, okay, this is the same guy. There's not much doubt about it. And every single one of his accounts had a balance of 49,000 rupees 999. Just 1 rupee below the amount at which you have to declare. You've got to provide your PAN card. So this sort of a pattern is reasonably common in a variety of cases. We were also investigating after the Hyderabad bomb blasts, whether there were a certain group of telecom SIM cards that were only calling each other as a small group and not making any calls outside of this small group, and were all switched off 4 hours prior to the blasts. Thing is, analysis is interesting, but for someone to begin with, is there like a handbook of analysis? Is there, how does one go about starting to test data using analysis in a simple way? Network analysis is all fine, tools are all fine, but what can you do today in the absence of tools or in the absence of these techniques? Well, it turns out that there is one relatively simple technique that works extraordinarily well. In fact, to the point that this is the one technique that almost every analyst uses. And this is the one technique that almost every tool applies. It is simply count stuff and plot. I'm going to give you examples of how powerful this can be by taking real life data. One such example is a piece of work that we did with the education department in Tamil Nadu, where they said, look, we want some insights based on marks data. What can you tell us about the marks data? Let's just count and plot. Let's start with the basics. Let us see how many students got 0 marks, 1 mark, 2 marks, etc. in the subject of English, for example. Out here, you have a histogram. On the bottom, you have marks ranging from 0 to 100, and the height of each bar represents the number of students that got 0 marks, 1 mark, 10 marks, 100 marks, etc. And you can see that it's approximately a normal curve. There are very few students who got low marks, very few students that got high marks, but you see a spike. That spike is at 35. You know what this is like? The passing exam. Okay, this is weird. You show it to the education department, they say, we swear this is not official. Meaning, whatever is happening here is happening because of the teachers. We are not telling the teachers to do it. But what you also observe is that the teachers are not being consistent here. There are students failing at 34. There are students failing at 33. The number there at 34 and 33 is not 0 if you're a borderline student. Nobody fails between 30 and 35. The teachers have all gotten together and said, okay, if it's 30 and above, then just make the student pass. And the education department, who's been sitting on this data for the last 20 years, says, we did not know this. We had no idea. Yes, please. The question is, what's the difference in the coloring? The students that have eventually passed are shown in blue. The students that have eventually failed are shown in orange. The thing is, even if you pass in social science, you may still fail because of another subject. So those are the orange lines on the right side. But if you fail in social science, you fail overall. That's therefore all the students that are in orange on the left side. Mathematics was another interesting one. Firstly, a lot of so-called moderation. I actually cut this graph short for consistency with the previous ones. It actually goes on higher to beyond the ceiling. There are a lot more than 1 lakh students who got exactly 35 mathematics. So clearly the teachers are being very kind about it. But despite that, there are more single subject failures in mathematics than any other subject. The other oddity is a spike at 100. Now, it's strange, but I've heard a lot of explanations. Some people say, that's because mathematics is one of those subjects where the answer is either right or wrong, and therefore it's possible to score 100. Some people say mathematics is bimodal. That is, there are some people who get it and some people that don't, and those that get it are in the minority. So if they were given a simple paper, which is the paper normally set for the average, then they would have ordinarily scored 110 or so, and it's just then being pushed downwards. I've heard several explanations, I don't know. And what you're looking at this point is not why is something happening, but look, I've spotted an oddity. Tell me if this is a data error or tell me if this is really happening. If it's a data error, we can fix it. If it's something really happening, then it's weird and interesting, and that therefore merges into the job of an analyst. ICSC last year, when we were playing around with the data, showed possibly one of the weirdest patterns that I've ever seen in all my life. Nobody in the entire country was awarded 93 marks. Nobody in the entire country got 91. Nobody in the entire country got 87, etc. Out of the 100 possible marks that could be awarded, only 33 marks were ever awarded. Nobody got the rest of those marks. This led to a bit of investigation. So first thing I did was check with a few ICSE teachers. They said, no, we have given every single mark. In fact, my aunt, who's such a teacher, showed me some mark sheets. She said, look, I've given 93, I've given 84. And obviously, these marks are no longer there, even for those students. So there's clearly some adjustment that's happening at the top. So we presented this to the media, and they shared it with the public. There was a huge outcry about what was happening here. And after about a week of being hounded, the ICSE chairman came out with a very mild-sounding statement. He said, we use a policy of moderation that results in this kind of a distribution. So we still don't know what he meant by that. It remains a complete mystery. CBSE had a very different kind of mystery, but this was resolved too. The biggest spike is not at the pass mark, the biggest spike is at 95. And this was last year. What had happened was the media was all about one particular statistic in the CBSE results last 5 years. Every single year, the percentage of students scoring above 95% had been consistently increasing. So they said, what kind of marks are you giving? Some people are, of course, saying that it's a good thing. A lot of students are getting good marks. Some people were saying this is really bad, but there was a lot of attention. So there was an internal memo that went in, a very, very mild-sounding memo saying that there is considerable attention being paid to this number. We want to make sure that our marking this year is absolutely fair and ensure that there is nothing extremely favorable or unfavorable. Very, very mild-sounding note. But the message was very clear to everyone. Find everyone who got above 95 and push them down to 95, which is what is happening here. That mark, that spike is at 95, and there's a huge dip beyond that. You'll find very few students there. It's like there's a quota, so much can get above 95, and 95 or less, we are not too worried. Just push them all to the highest possible mark. So last year was definitely a bad year for good students who have taken the CBSE exam. You just get pushed down to 95. But since we had all of this data, see, we could do this count and plot for every single parameter. There's just nothing that was beyond our reach. We could just as well look at, we had every student's name, parent's name, address, date of birth, caste, community, everything. We can practically compute their horoscope. So we did. Said, let's see if the sun sign makes a difference. Let's see if if numerology has an impact, if the first letter of the name makes an impact. Let's see if there are oddities in the data there. So how many people think that the sun sign makes a difference to the marks? 2, 3, 4. I think I saw 3 or 4 hands. I presume the rest, how many people think it does not make a difference? Okay, it's clear majority. You're all wrong. Turns out that if you take the Tamil Nadu results in 2011, on average, June bonds were scoring 720. September bonds were scoring 840, and that difference is a solid 120 marks out of 1200, 10 percentage points, enough to bring the top down to the 33rd percentile. In fact, there is only one other parameter that has a larger impact on marks on average, and that is whether the student is SC/ST or not. Every other parameter, be it gender, be it the choice of subject, group in class 10 or 12, every other parameter has a lesser impact than just the month of birth. So we said, okay, unusual, large, but possibly a data blip. Let's repeat this. 2009, same pattern. 2010, same pattern. Every year from 2007 to 2013, same pattern. Break it up by district, same pattern. Break it up by subject, same pattern. By gender, same pattern. Class 10 versus class 12, same pattern. Do this in Andhra Pradesh, same pattern. Karnataka, same pattern. CBSE across the country, same pattern. ICSE across the country, same pattern. You probably guess what's happening here. This, and it could be data error, but in this particular case, it's not. Yeah. See, the Canadian junior hockey team had a similar phenomenon which Malcolm Gladwell wrote about in his book Outliers, where almost all the players were born in the months of January, February, and March. No selection bias. It just so happens that the only eligibility criteria for the hockey selection is that you go through the national training, which begins at age 8. Now, if as a child born on 2nd January comes for training when he or she is almost 8 years old, the child is told, no, you're 7 years, 364 days, not 8 years old. Come back the next year. At which point, the child is 8 years, 364 days old, almost a full year older than the youngest in the class. And at that age, it makes a huge difference. So a January born child is invariably the oldest in the class, plays a little better, more mature emotionally, better built physically, and the coach pats him on the back, plays a little more motivated, to the point that 6 years later when the time comes for selections, it is the oldest students that are performing the best. Schools in Tamil Nadu open in July. June borns will just make the cutoff, they're 6 years, 1 month old. July borns could go either way. August borns invariably miss the cutoff and then switch over. All we're doing is counting and plotting. Now, since birthdays were so interesting, we said let's take this to the US and just see when people are born. Is it random? Meaning, are births just uniformly distributed or randomly distributed? And are there errors in that? So here's what we found. We found that if we take the data from 1975 to 1990, every single birth, from January to December, from the 1st of the month to the 31st of the month, the intensity of the cell tells you how many people were born on that day. And the weird thing is that the bulk of the births seem to be concentrated in this period, July, August, September, particularly September. Now, this is a known phenomenon. Most conceptions happen during the winter holiday seasons, and 9 months later is when the kids are born. But what is even stranger is that there are surprisingly few births during the Christmas holiday seasons, during the Thanksgiving holidays, during the New Year holidays, during the Independence Day holidays. I mean, it's almost like the doctors in the hospitals are taking time off during this time, so let's move the births around a little bit. It's possible, you know, and the reason is because there were a relatively large number of C-section births during this time. So it's actually possible, but let's not blame just the doctors and hospitals. Do you notice a light stripe on the 13th of every month? Superstitious. You don't want your kids to be born on 13th, an unlucky day. You don't want your kids to be born on April 1st either. That's relatively lighter. That's Fool's Day. You don't want your kid to be born on April Fool's Day. But Feb 14th, Valentine's Day, that's a good day to be born on. Similarly, St. Patrick's Day, March 16th or 17th, that's a good day to be born on. So the US can be like this. And out here, because we can correlate these high frequencies to holidays, special days, etc., we know that A, it's probably not data error. It's more likely to be just individual preferences. But let's apply this to India and see what it's like. That's the pattern for India. Almost no one is born in August, which is strange, and you can start trying to map this to behavioral patterns, but it seems more likely that we can map it to data errors, right? But think about it. Firstly, let me tell you, this is the same data as the previous slide, school education data. If your child is born in August, consider what the parents' choices are. Wait for 1 year, because the child would not get into school in July. The child is only 5 years, 11 months old. Or fudge the dates a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that the dates are fudged just because there are a surprisingly large number of births in end of May and the first half of June. Do you notice these vertical stripes on the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, the 20th, the 25th? When people cook up numbers, they cook up round numbers. And this has an impact on the child's marks, because when you overlay the marks of these children on the same graph, you'll notice that green is good marks, red is low marks on average. Children who say they're born on the 10th, the 15th, the 20th, etc., have a relatively reddish stripe. In other words, there's a lower average for children who say they're born on the 5th or the 10th, or particularly the 1st of any month, which indicates that there's probably a higher proportion of younger kids who've been brought up into this time, and therefore getting into school early and suffering as a consequence. In fact, the first half of June is littered with such examples. June the 1st is the single most common birthday in India. It is far more common than the second most common birthday, which is January the 1st. But Jan the 1st is a rural phenomenon. The exact date of birth may not be known, so the year is provided and the administration just fills out 1st of Jan as the date. But June the 1st is primarily an urban phenomenon, intended at driving children into school early, and you can see what it's doing to their marks. Green is high marks, red is low marks, on average. So what's the time? In data as well. For instance, let's just see which party had the most number of victories. That's an easy one. Congress, right? They were there all over the place. Let's see which party, other than Congress, which party has had a high success rate other than Congress. Again, relatively easy spot as well. Plotted, there's Congress at 51%. Almost 1 out of every 2 seats the Congress has contested, they won. The other party that's had a similar victory is the DMK. Almost every other seat that they've won is Congress. So as you do this stuff, you start finding weird things. So for example, which party has had the largest number of losses? At this point, we thought for sure that we had an error, because there's one party that out of 700 seats that it had contested in, lost every single one of those 700 seats. Okay. 100% confident that there's an error in the data. We checked, we rechecked. The Election Commission PDFs said it was fine. And most people that we asked said we have never heard of this party. This party is called the Doordarshi Party, which was established in 1980s, founded in Ahmedabad by Baba Jai Gurudev. They contested in the 1984 elections in about 90 seats. They lost all of them. They contested again in the 1989 elections in 280 odd seats. Only one party had more candidates than this, that was Congress. So effectively, this was the second largest party contesting at that time. They lost all elections. They didn't give up, they persisted. In 1991, they fielded 321 candidates and lost every single one. Not only did they lose, in no constituency were they even the runner-up. At best, they were the third, and that was the constituencies where there were only 3 candidates.